Our daughter's wedding? It doesn't concern me. I've already made plans to travel with my adorable niece that day. We finally got the room we wanted. Traveling always comes first, right? On the day the family of my daughter's partner came, my husband suddenly canceled to see them when his niece called him, even though I had told him in advance. He wouldn't budge an inch on the wedding date, even though we had informed him well in advance, claiming he had made plans before our daughter's wedding date was set. My husband says it's because my niece gets attached to me, but my daughter doesn't get attached to me at all. But this strong affection for his niece wasn't something new. His attention merely shifted from his sister to his niece. I strongly asked him if he was sure about his decision and if he wouldn't regret prioritizing his niece over our daughter. Getting hated by my niece by prioritizing my daughter would hurt more. It's obvious I'd regret that more. If he feels so strongly, then there's nothing to be done. Our daughter said nothing against my husband's decision, so I figured it'd be a waste of time to try and persuade him further. On the day of the wedding, thanks to a clever move by the sister-in-law's husband, things took an unexpected turn. As a result, my husband came to learn an unthinkable truth, and he was completely taken aback, facing a devastating blow in his life. I'm in my mid-50s, having been married for 28 years. My husband is from the same generation as me, and we met at a dinner party with mutual friends. Back in my 20s, among my parents' age, it was still an era when women were expected to find happiness in marriage and raising children. If I was going to get married anyway, I wanted to do it after I tried my best in my life. So I fought off my parents' silent pressure. But after turning 25, dodging their expectations became hard. So, when I discussed it with a friend, she introduced me to my current husband. When asked if I had romantic feelings for my husband, looking back, I think I didn't. I just didn't want to settle down with someone just because my parents preferred. There was some compromise and a rush decision involved. I believe my husband probably felt the same way. I wanted to continue working at the company where I was employed. I made it clear I wouldn't quit marriage and I didn't believe in the old-fashioned idea that women should only stay at home. Then my husband encouraged me by telling me that women's social roles are changing in the US as well and that we should continue to move forward. I took it to mean he was understanding, and I felt intuitively that we could build a happy home together. We quickly got close, and within about 6 months after we met, we tied the knot and began our life as newlyweds. I wanted to have children while young and then return to the workforce. John supported my thoughts, and with our combined effort, I found out I was pregnant within the first year of our marriage. I gave birth to an only daughter. After that, I was always on the move, juggling parenting, household chores, and work. By the time our daughter reached adulthood, all the struggles felt like a part of our shared happiness. I couldn't help but cry in front of her, not caring about others' attention. From all this, one might think we had a picture-perfect family. However, there was a hidden problem with my husband. After marriage, John began revealing his true nature. Firstly, we started splitting all living expenses in half. He made me sign a contract stating that neither of us would ask about each other's salaries. Another clause stated that after deducting the living expenses, whatever my husband did with his salary was none of my business. Behind my husband's actions was the influence of his sister-in-law. While my husband had a rather average look with typical features, his sister had a beauty that was uncommon for ordinary people. It was surprising to hear my sister-in-law hadn't undergone any cosmetic surgeries. She wasn't just a beauty with a good personality, but rather, she was incredibly headstrong with a queen-like demeanor. In every aspect, she was the polar opposite of me, and we couldn't get along. It seemed that she felt the same because she didn't try to interact with me directly, which might have been a blessing. However, that was only true if my husband sided with me. The husband idolized his sister in every way and was a devout follower of her. It wasn't long after we got married that he started openly showing this unusual affection for her, an affection that went beyond the acceptable range of just being close siblings. At first, I thought they were just a close brother and sister. I've heard from coworkers and seniors that even after marriage, siblings often visit each other or go on trips together. But it was rare for a brother and sister of opposite genders to be so close. My sister-in-law got married and started a family a bit earlier than my husband did. Upon getting married, she became a full-time housewife. I wondered if she had too much time on her hands because even after my husband started our family, he would often be called out by her just as he had been when he was single. I hoped that, over time, my husband would prioritize our family more, so I tried not to nag him about it. But when I was pregnant and suffering from severe morning sickness, or when I needed him to accompany me to the hospital due to sudden health issues, he'd always rush to his sister's side whenever she called, like a puppy wagging its tail and running to its owner. Once, I couldn't help myself by any means and asked him strongly why he didn't think of me first, even though I had my husband's child in my belly. Heck, my sister's pregnant too and she's feeling lonely. Of course, I'm gonna prioritize her and her baby. It was stated with such confidence as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. I realized he valued blood ties more than his commitment to his wife. Maybe the reason my husband married me was because he had feelings for someone he couldn't be with. If that were the case, it would make sense. I would have felt so much better thinking this was just a sham marriage. I did feel that my husband had an unusual affection toward his sister, but I trusted him as he was cooperative with our family planning. I believed that as our family grew, my husband's affection would naturally turn to our blood-related daughter. If he could shower our child with love, then I was okay to be his second priority. With that resolve, I took great care of the child in my womb and approached my due date. Initially, my husband had promised to be there for the birth, but when the baby didn't arrive as quickly as expected, he chose work over being there for me, saying it was work hours. It wasn't that there were no grievances, but there was a prevailing attitude at the time: why should a man sacrifice his work to be present at the birth of a child, where he can't particularly help? I thought it wasn't better to go with the flow if my husband was to continue working at his current job, but I braced myself for the challenging solo childbirth. Nevertheless, hearing my baby's first cry was pure joy, wiping away all my worries. Our child was a girl, and she was a bit heavier and bigger than the average baby girl. She grew up healthy, and I think my husband did love our daughter in his own way. But as she began to lose her baby features, he became less and less interested in her. My sister-in-law and her husband also had a daughter, and she was born the same year as my child. Their daughter, our niece, grew up to be a spitting image of her mother in her younger years, a true beauty. My husband started spending more time with his sister and our niece, pretty much ignoring our daughter. I came to play both the mother and father roles. I was gentle like a mother but also strict like a father, raising our daughter. At my daughter's elementary school sports day, while other fathers participated in events to support and cheer on their children, I had to struggle for my daughter. Meanwhile, my husband's involvement with our niece, who looked just like her mother, grew. Not only did our niece resemble her mother in appearance, but their personalities were strikingly similar as well. She's headstrong and a tad arrogant, acting as though the world revolves around her. My sister-in-law's husband is a very sincere person, but he has become a yes man who can't say anything to his wife or daughter. He worked tirelessly outside, acting merely as a money provider for his queen bee-like sister-in-law. Even though he was working hard to pay off their mortgage, he seemed to have no place in their home. My sister-in-law often bragged, "My husband is just an ATM to me." This comment always made the relatives cringe when we gathered for family events. As time went on, our daughter understood her father's nature and started to disregard him. She began treating her father as if he was non-existent. As she entered her typical teenage years, my husband, taking advantage of being neglected by his daughter, increasingly answered his sister's beck and call. He started struggling more and more to meet her often unreasonable demands. Our household felt like a three-legged race, just between my daughter and me. When my daughter reached high school and began working part-time, the agreement of splitting the living expenses between my husband and me broke. "If our daughter's working, I only have to contribute a third of the expenses, right?" he claimed, unilaterally amending our agreement. With 2/3 of his salary now free for him to use, he became even more subservient to his sister. Wanting not to burden me, our daughter chose not to attend private schools for both high school and college and covered her expenses from her part-time earnings. I graciously accepted her contributions and started saving them for her future wedding. Thus, our daughter grew up, graduated from college, and secured a decent job. Even then, our daughter continued to give a portion of her salary to the household. I accepted it as a gesture of her love and continued to save it for her future wedding. About 3 years into her job, my daughter confided in me that she'd met someone she wanted to marry. She wanted both my husband and me to meet him at a time convenient for us. Due to my husband's excessive obsession with his sister, our family dynamic wasn't exactly the norm. I had considered the possibility that my daughter might become disillusioned with married life and choose to remain single forever, so knowing she had found someone she was serious about marrying brought me immense relief. At the same time, I was very happy. I was overjoyed that my daughter wanted to marry out of her own will and not due to societal pressures. More than anything, I sincerely hoped for my daughter's future to be filled with even greater happiness. However, my husband seemed more indifferent than calm. He seemed to listen to our daughter's story, nodding when she said she had someone she wanted to marry and that she wanted us to meet him. He wasn't saying he wouldn't meet him, but he stated he couldn't commit to a meeting and left the table. He said we could choose a date for him, and if he had nothing on that day, he'd show up. His attitude was rather careless. As expected, despite our best efforts to schedule a meetup with my daughter's potential spouse well in advance, on the morning of the scheduled meeting, my husband was called out by our niece and left. I had asked him to possibly reschedule, but he said he couldn't make his beloved niece wait and went on his way. He had told our daughter to marry whomever she liked and that he wouldn't object. In fact, the day for the gathering with my daughter's potential spouse was scheduled well in advance, and it was arranged that the guy's parents would be joining as well. Later on, when I found out that his parents would also be present and informed my husband, he said, understood. He couldn't claim he wasn't aware they'd be coming. Unable to keep my husband around, I greeted my daughter's fiancé and his parents and simultaneously regretted my husband's absence. I didn't know how to explain it to them. It was too rude to admit that he knew and still backed out at the last minute, so I fudged the truth. But anyone sharp would likely sense that there's some hidden issue in our household. The entire situation had me on pins and needles, fearing my daughter's engagement might fall apart. However, both my daughter's fiancé and his parents were incredibly understanding, saying that everyone has some family matters they'd rather not share. Deep down, no one wishes to be associated with a family with baggage. As time went on, I worried that emerging issues might put my daughter at a disadvantage. While I felt saved by the magnanimity of the fiancé's parents, I was restless, fearing some kind of backlash. Then, my daughter revealed a certain truth to me. I see, if that's the case, maybe we can somehow address my husband's erratic behavior. I looked forward to the new connections my daughter's marriage would bring. We decided to let the couple handle the wedding date and venue details. A few days after we managed to see my daughter's fiancé and his parents, my daughter informed us of the wedding date and venue. The only availability for the dress she desperately wanted to wear was on that particular day, and the fiancé was on board with it. Given the circumstances, we felt it wasn't our place to interfere. I conveyed my daughter's wishes to my husband, asking him to keep that day free at all costs. Well, I can't do that day. I've got a trip planned with my adorable niece and my dear sister. I scheduled this before I heard about the wedding date. Besides, I really don't care about her wedding. It's her wedding, not mine. My husband argued that the trip with his niece had been scheduled before my daughter's wedding. My niece was really looking forward to this trip, and no matter how much I pleaded with him to reschedule, my husband wouldn't budge. Actually, I hadn't been this persistent even when he bailed from being present for our daughter's birth. Since marrying my husband, I've never pushed this hard for something. Yet, despite my pleas, my husband kept saying I was being persistent and showed no intention of changing his plans, even as our daughter's wedding day was fast approaching. You're really not gonna change your plans, huh? You're the one being stubborn. When I say I won't, I won't. Absolute. All right, just remember you said that. Don't regret it later. Regret? I won't. I'd regret it more if I changed my plans with my niece. Since my husband had said that was bad enough, I decided not to bring up the matter any further. Then, on the day of our daughter's wedding, my husband, humming, left the house dragging a large suitcase behind him. I was headed to the ceremony venue with my daughter, busy getting her ready in the bride's waiting room. That's when my sister-in-law's husband appeared. From the time I first met him and his wife, he was always somewhat in the background, but today, he was particularly noticeable. That's because he had forcibly brought my sister-in-law, niece, and husband with him. He literally dragged both my sister-in-law and my husband by their arms, with my niece chasing after them, asking, "Where are you taking mommy?" When my sister-in-law's husband approached my daughter and me, he explained the situation. My sister-in-law's husband had originally planned and prepared to attend my daughter's wedding. My sister-in-law and my niece had said they couldn't change their travel plans and wouldn't be attending, so he had understood. This morning, while my sister-in-law's husband was preparing to attend the wedding, and my sister-in-law and my niece were reconfirming their travel plans, my husband showed up, all excited, to pick up his sister and niece. When he found out that the bride's father, my husband, was ditching his own daughter's wedding to go on a trip with his sister and niece, he was livid. Usually quiet and almost invisible, like an ATM, when my sister-in-law's husband exploded in anger, it seemed my niece, sister-in-law, and husband were all taken aback. Right then and there, my sister-in-law's husband cancelled their travel plans. Now that the three of them had their schedules wide open, there was no excuse to miss the wedding, especially after getting an earful from him. My sister-in-law's husband heatedly said things like, "There's no way you can skip your daughter's big day. Act like a real father for your daughter's sake." He also asked his wife why she hadn't curbed her younger brother's behavior or reprimanded her daughter's whims. It was as if the feelings he had been holding back, just like air, had exploded in anger. In truth, it should have been me addressing my husband about all these things. Maybe deep down, I had given up on the idea that he'd ever listen. So, I just silently watched my giddy husband's selfish behavior, resulting in my sister-in-law's husband dragging them to the venue. I can't tell how my daughter feels about her father prioritizing his niece over her. Despite him flaking on our first family gathering and possibly skipping her wedding day, she's always just brushed it off without a word. Maybe she thinks expecting anything from her father is just a waste of time. I couldn't begin to guess what she was feeling right now, seeing all this unfold before her eyes. But if my daughter says it bothers her, I'd have the courage to kick both my husband and my sister-in-law out of the venue. I too want to do something motherly for my daughter on her big day. I want to do something for her. As I waited for my daughter's reaction, my niece and my sister-in-law, annoyed about their cancelled trip, began to voice their displeasure. "It's so arrogant. He's just an ATM, he cannot lecture me. I've never thought of you as a father. Don't give me that sour-faced lecture, it's so annoying. A wedding for a plain and unremarkable girl like your daughter? What a waste of time, truly. Endless complaints and demands for cancellation fees." Then, the groom and his parents, who had noticed some commotion in my daughter's dressing room, approached us. "If you're having issues, should we call security?" The groom's father offered. Immediately after hearing his voice, my husband's face turned pale. "What? Why's the company president here?" The groom, who had shown concern for my daughter and me, was set to become the CEO of the company where my husband worked. The groom's father was the current CEO. The groom had heard that my daughter and her father weren't particularly close, but he was shocked by the current scene. Being both the CEO of the company where my husband worked and the groom's father, he separated his professional demeanor from his personal life. Yet, when he learned that my husband had chosen to go on a trip with his niece over attending his own daughter's wedding, he approached my husband with a mix of disbelief and anger. Even though he demanded an explanation, my husband, who always prioritized his niece and sister-in-law, said, "Why do I need a reason to prioritize them? They're more important than my own daughter." While this might have flown with me, it wouldn't in the business world. The CEO firmly held that while family is important, prioritizing nieces over one's own child is unreasonable. Then, my husband turned to our daughter for support. "Help me out here. I've always prioritized my niece over you, and when I said I wasn't going to attend the wedding, you didn't try to stop me. It's only natural that I'd feel closer to my niece who adores me, rather than my daughter who doesn't show me affection, right?" It's not that the daughter wasn't attached to her father, it's that the father never fostered that attachment with his daughter. From when she first started speaking, she'd known the word daddy and had once been eager to play with him. She tried to bond with him once, but he consistently chose his niece over her. As a result, she gradually distanced herself, and by her teenage years, she barely acknowledged her father. Instead of being sorry for his past actions, he claims this happened because of the daughter. How can someone be so selfish? We don't need a man who can blatantly claim he's done nothing wrong in front of his daughter. At that moment, I couldn't help but feel my sister-in-law's husband's actions were unnecessary things. While I initially applauded him internally for speaking up, it's ironic, but we don't need someone incapable of reflecting on their mistakes. When my husband sought agreement from our daughter and she remained unresponsive, he tried to grab the hem of her wedding gown. But she quickly pulled away, creating a distance. "I stopped thinking of you as my father a long time ago. But still, half of your blood flows inside me. It's disgusting. But my partner told me that I was a precious one. That's why I tried my best to think that it would be okay if I were to face my father. But now I can't do it anymore. Don't show yourself in front of us again." Our daughter clearly declared her estrangement. Once my daughter has her own family and truly stands on her own, there's no reason for me to endure this situation. He is the worst kind of man who, even on his daughter's special day, blames her to justify himself. You know, I also wanted to tell you something. I'm getting a divorce. In retrospect, I could have raised my daughter without any troubles on my own salary. I shouldn't have worried about society's perception that children might feel pitiable without both parents or that they might not grow up properly in a single-parent home. All that should have mattered was the happiness and well-being of my daughter and me. Maybe, up until now, I unconsciously cared too much about what others would think, just like my parents did. The commotion spread among the other guests, and soon security was called. Eventually, my husband, his sister, and his niece were kicked out of the wedding venue. There were several of his direct bosses and subordinates among the guests, so news of this debacle spread rapidly in his company, severely damaging his reputation. He couldn't maintain his usual confident demeanor at work. Having been told we were divorcing and no longer feeling welcome at home, my husband sought refuge in his sister's home, where his precious niece lived. But, suddenly, the niece, who had always adored him, and his sister, who had always said he was their only hope, turned their backs on him. What do you have left once the only thing you had going for you, your money, is gone? I'm not interested in a man without money. I really misjudged you. I thought you had a dull wife and had trained her well, but you're turning the tables on me. A man without money is worthless, isn't he? Just disappear. Until now, my husband had constantly belittled my brother-in-law, treating him like a mere ATM, only to finally realize that he was treated the same way. Then, like flipping a hand, my heartbroken husband tried to cozy up to me again. All that truly matters is you and our daughter, who shares my blood. He pleaded with me to reconsider the divorce, promising to change his ways, but my mind was made up. He never listened to my requests before, so why should I, who have put up with so much, have to listen to him now? I was ready to move out, already having secured a new place. Ignoring his desperate pleas, I left the house. His whining echoed behind me until the door slammed shut, but I never looked back. The moment I stepped out of the property, I felt an overwhelming sense of liberation from the long bond of marriage. Shortly after, our divorce was finalized surprisingly smoothly. My ex-husband, disgusted with everything, seemed to want to wrap things up quickly. While it worked out well for me, my ex-husband, who acted on impulse, faced challenges down the road. For my part, I started living freely on my own, and I found great joy in working hard without having to worry about household chores. The major problem waiting for my ex-husband was the mortgage. When we first took out the mortgage, we both had jobs, and that was considered when determining the repayment term. I think with his current salary, he could just about manage to live alone, but there had been ongoing issues at his workplace regarding his arrogant attitude toward his subordinates. Adding to that, his rude behavior at the future company president's wedding and other personal issues led him to be sidelined at work, in a position where his presence didn't really matter. Not only was he denied any chance of promotion or raises, but his salary was also significantly reduced. With that reduced income, continuing to pay off the high mortgage became challenging, leading him to eventually give up the house he'd lived in for over 25 years. It seems my ex-husband moved into a small, old, cheap apartment, taking only the bare essentials with him. I've heard the walls are thin and you can hear the neighbors' noises in that rundown place. My sister-in-law quickly cast aside her penniless brother and seemed to have a plan to wait for things to cool down, showing some kindness to her husband. However, things didn't go as easily as the sister-in-law hoped, and she was told by her husband that he wanted a divorce. What? You've got to be kidding! Who do you think you are? I'm the one who should be asking for a divorce, and you should agree to it, got it? The proud sister-in-law was deeply hurt and humiliated to be told about divorce from her not-so-impressive husband. I've heard she's been going around saying she was the one who demanded the divorce and made him agree. Furthermore, my sister-in-law, who prides herself on looking young and beautiful even in her 50s, firmly believes that no man could resist her charms. She's been attending senior dating events that cater to wealthy men. I'm gonna remarry a rich man and live the high life, she'd often boast. Indeed, as confident as my sister-in-law is, when she attends these dating events, many older gentlemen are eager to propose to flock around her. However, because she's incredibly haughty with an insatiable pride, I've heard she's never managed to secure a date after any of these events. My niece is the same age as my daughter, but she lacks real-world experience. Though one might commend her for being studious, The reality is she failed in her job hunting. Concerned about appearances, my sister-in-law suggested that continue her studies in graduate school. My niece seemed to enjoy her time there, especially the attention she received from her male peers, but things took a turn after her parents' divorce. First off, my sister-in-law had been a stay-at-home mom, so there was no money to keep my niece in graduate school. Although they kept their house after the divorce since her husband moved out, they still needed money to live on. Their savings began to run out quickly. It was only a matter of time before my niece's tuition went unpaid. She was told to drop out and start job hunting immediately. But since it was discovered during the interview that the reason she went to graduate school was not to study seriously, there was no way niece was gonna be hired mid-career. Around the time they started struggling for even the next day's meal, my niece began working in a nightclub. At first, her good looks got her some attention, but her arrogant attitude toward others caused trouble with the customers. She kept switching her workplace, so her income was never stable, leading to financial hardships. Now, it seems she's getting by selling designer items that she had previously demanded my ex-husband and my former sister-in-law's husband bought for her.